In today's video, we are going to be talking about common myths of STDs, or STIs actually. We now call STDs STIs. That's the more accurate term. So when you hear STI or STD, I'm referring to sexually transmitted infection. So that's what we're talking about in today's video. But first, if you're new here, my name is Diana. I'm a physician assistant. I specialize in women's health and gynecology, and you are watching In the Pink. On this channel, I talk about women's health issues, vaginal discharge, birth control, pregnancy, and sometimes motherhood. So if this is something that at all appeals to you, hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified of future videos. But without any further ado, let's talk about myth number 1. And that is getting an STI from using a public bathroom. The toilet seat is a non-porous, hard, cold surface. And the fact is, any type of STI is not gonna live on that surface long enough to be able to transfer it to you. Plus, when you sit on a toilet, your genitals aren't touching the toilet seat. It's just your thighs. You're not actually having live STI contacting the genitalia where you would get infected. That being said, personally, I still always put toilet paper or some kind of barrier down on my toilet seat, not because I'm worried about STIs, but because if somebody splashed a little bit of urine out, even though I'm not gonna get an infection from it, I still like a little bit of that barrier. That's just me, but I'm a little bit of a germaphobe. Moving on to myth number 2. If you're having oral or anal sex, you can't get an STI. This is absolutely not true. You can get infected with an STI whenever there is a transfer of genital secretions to any type of mucosa. So that means if you're having oral sex, you can get an STI in your mouth. If you're having anal sex, you got it. You can get an STI in and around the anus. So whatever type of sex you're engaging in, make sure that you are using the proper barrier method, which leads me to myth number 3. All types of birth control prevent STIs, and that is absolutely false. Birth control really is to prevent pregnancy, and there really is only one type of that birth control that can also help prevent the sexually transmitted infections, and that is a barrier method. Anything else, birth controls, the vaginal ring, arm implants, IUDs, none of those will prevent the transmission of STIs. So if you're on the pill, if you're on the ring, if you got an IUD, or if you got an implant and you're engaging in intercourse, especially with a new partner, always use a barrier method as well. Myth number 4. You can tell if your partner has an STI. Yeah, that's false. As medical providers, we might do an exam and not be able to tell that a person has an STI. Many STIs are asymptomatic, especially early on, or are asymptomatic at times and symptomatic at other times, like in the case with HSV or herpes simplex. Somebody might not have an actual outbreak of herpes, but still can be shedding the virus. Don't rely on your eyes to determine if you are at risk for getting a sexually transmitted infection. Myth number 5. When you're getting your Pap test, that means you are getting tested for all sexually transmitted infections, and that just is not true. When you are getting your Pap test, you're actually just testing for abnormal cells on your cervix. Now, abnormal cervical cells are almost exclusively caused by a sexually transmitted infection called HPV, or human papillomavirus. And in some cases, depending on your age, depending on your medical provider, you might be tested for HPV at the same time as your Pap, but that is all if they're just checking your Pap test. Now, that being said, sometimes when a pathologist who is looking at your sample under the microscope, they might see evidence of gonorrhea or chlamydia, and they can document that on your lab result. Then your medical provider can relay that back to you. But that's not a sure way to be tested for gonorrhea or chlamydia, and that certainly does not test for other things like HIV, hepatitis, or syphilis. So if you are concerned that you might have an STI, Or if you just want to be screened, when you go in for your well woman exam, talk to your provider and specifically say that you would like to be tested for sexually transmitted infections. And especially if you have an exposure that you know of, make sure to mention that to them as well. Certain sexually transmitted infections can be tested with a vaginal swab, and certain sexually transmitted infections can be tested with a urine sample, but others need to be tested with blood work. So depending on what you're at risk for, what you think you might be exposed to, you might be tested with a vaginal swab or with a urine sample. Myth number 6. If you have sex in a hot tub, that can decrease your chances of getting a sexually transmitted infection. That is false. I think the idea of that myth is that perhaps the chlorine that is in the hot tub could kill whatever STI is floating around in there, and that just isn't the case. If you have sex in a hot tub, you absolutely can still get a sexually transmitted infection, and on top of that, being in a hot tub can increase your chances of getting other types of infection. And finally, myth number 7. If you've only had sex with one partner, you can't get a sexually transmitted infection. Now, that could be true if your sexual partner has never had sex with another person and you have never had sex with another person, and then you guys become sexually active. Neither of you have ever been exposed to a sexually transmitted infection, therefore you can't give each other a sexually transmitted infection. But if you've never had sex with anybody else, but your sexual partner has before and they've been exposed, or they have a sexually transmitted infection, then they could give it to you. Or if you think you're in a monogamous relationship and they don't, and they're having sex with somebody else, they can then bring it to you. So even if you're only having sex with one person, there's some scenarios where they could still give you a sexually transmitted infection. So just something that you need to keep in mind, even if you are in a monogamous relationship, meaning you are only having sex with that person, hopefully they are only having sex with you as well. Now, if you think you have a sexually transmitted infection, or if you have a partner who has told you that they've been diagnosed with a sexually transmitted infection, you need to go get tested. So make an appointment to go see your medical practitioner so that you can be tested, because there are treatments for sexually transmitted infections. Now, there are some infections like gonorrhea and chlamydia and syphilis that can actually just be treated and then it's cured, then you're done with it. There are other STIs like herpes or HIV, or in some cases hepatitis C, where they can't be cured, but they can be managed. But whatever the case is, you need to make sure to be tested. Now, the very best scenario is to make an appointment to see your medical provider, like I mentioned. If you can't see a medical provider for whatever reason, you can actually be tested at home. You can have testing kits sent to your home where you can discreetly sample yourself, send the testing kit back, and they will test you for sexually transmitted infections. They will notify you of the results, and if you are positive, then they have providers that can contact you to help you with treatment. My opinion is the best option is to go see your medical provider. But if that's not available, I like that there's a second option for you so that you can still have some access to diagnosing and to treatment. So I will leave a link for that in the video description down below. If that's something that you need, I hope that helps you out. But again, if you're new to Dianainthepink, hit the subscribe button. Also, if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified of future videos. Right here, I'm gonna put a link to my video on symptoms of sexually transmitted infection. It's got a ton of good information to help you know what symptoms you need to look for and what to do about it. So click on that video right here. I will see you over there.